Thank you for listening to Soho Bites, the only podcast in the world, as far as we're aware, dedicated to talking about films set in Soho, the beating heart of bohemian cosmopolitan London. If you would like to support the show, you can do this in the form of a star rating or review at sohobitespodcast.com/review, or if you'd like to put a small amount of money where your mouth is, you can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Donations can be from as little as £3, which will buy, at London prices, about half a drink for one of our thirsty guests. You may hear some different URLs in the upcoming episode, but by far the easiest way is to follow one of those links. They are again sohobitespodcast.com/review and sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Thank you for your continued support and enjoy the episode.
You give me back my ring, I'll release Miss Trotter.
Nothing doing.
Then I'm afraid Miss Trotter will trot no more.
Hello and welcome to episode 51 of Soho Bites. Soho Bites is the podcast in which we talk about Soho and the films that are set there. My name is Dominic Delaghi, and can I just say, you've never looked lovelier. You go, girl. Don't know what that means. So, in the last episode, we dipped our toe into the historical true crime genre, looking at the murder of Samuel Adams by John C. Colt in 1841. That was in New York, though, many miles away from Soho in London, and even though there was a very good reason to be wandering down that particular alley, I thought this month we would talk about some good old, honest-to-goodness, proper, decent British crime. None of your foreign muck here, thank you very much. So our film for this episode is a little-known and seldom-watched crime drama from 1952 called King of the Underworld. It stars the king of melodrama, Tod Slaughter, as Terence Riley, who is, and I don't use these words lightly, a dastardly rotter. His nemesis is a former Scotland Yard detective turned a private investigator called Morley, played by Patrick Barr, who was vowed to bring the swine to justice. I did say that the film is seldom seen, and that's possibly because it's not actually very good. In fact, it's pretty shambolic, but there are reasons for that, which will be explained later. And I received a message on social media telling me that whenever I use the initials BFI, I don't explain what it stands for. And yeah, mea culpa. So, in the second half of the show, I'll be talking about King of the Underworld to Vic Pratt from the British Film Institute. That's the British Film Institute. There we go. And of course, Terence Riley, the King of the Underworld in King of the Underworld, is a fictional character despite Tod Slaughter's naturalistic and convincing performance. But there are, and have always been of course, real crime bosses out there who are a bit more menacing and dangerous than Terence Riley. One of those was known sometimes as the King of Soho, sometimes the Godfather of Soho. His name was Bernie Silver, and along with his chief henchman, Big Frank Mifsud, he stood at the top of a largely Maltese organisation known as the Syndicate, although Silver himself was not Maltese. From the late 1950s to the early 1970s, Bernie Silver and the Syndicate exerted an iron but discreet grip on Soho's vice industry, controlling strip clubs, brothels, clip joints, near beer bars and mucky bookshops. Bernie Silver kept a low profile and was known for being a very canny political operator, and he managed to carry on in Soho with impunity by doing deals with other criminals and, more importantly, with the police. At the peak of his powers in the 1960s, Silver was paying out tens of thousands of pounds to officers at all levels in the Met. A humble beat copper could expect a handshake and a £20 note from Silver if he encountered him in the street, an amount which would double his weekly wage. Those at the very top of the tree would all earn considerably more from dodgy backhanders. In one 16-month period, Detective Chief Superintendent Bill Moody and Commander Wally Virgo of the Serious Crime Squad trousered £53,000 between them. In today's money, that's just short of £750,000, and who said crime didn't pay? Ultimately, of course, it all came crashing down in the early 1970s, with prison sentences dished out to criminals and coppers alike. Silver's past also caught up with him when a murder he was alleged to have arranged in the 1950s, that of Tommy Scarface Smithson, resurfaced as villain turned upon villain. To find out more about Bernie Silver and this syndicate, I got in touch with Aidan McManus. Aidan is an old friend of the show, and after appearing in various documentaries talking about crime in Soho, he is rapidly approaching national treasure status. He's been knocking about in Soho for a very long time and currently runs a whole raft of walking tours around the area, including his very popular one about Gangland Soho. It was the first sunny day of the year, so we decided to meet up in the churchyard of St Anne's on Wardour Street, where it was warm but a bit noisy, hence the background babble. Aidan, welcome back to Soho Bites. Thank you for coming on again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Every few months I think, this topic, Aidan could talk about this, but then I can't have you on too often, so
that's all right.
I've saved this one for you. This is good. So we're talking about, the film we're talking about is The King of the Underworld for 1952. So we're talking about a character who in real life, his nickname was the King of Soho, Bernie Silver.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Bernie Silver.
Yeah, the King of Soho. In the papers, though, they called it the King, Vice Girls at the King of Soho's Court. He was born in the 20s, nice Jewish boy from Stoke Newington. Got started flat farming, which is like, people wouldn't rent flats to prostitutes. So these guys used to rent them and sublet them to them. Say the flat cost them £2 a week. Sometimes they were making 30, 40 quid a week out of them. But on the rent book, it said normal rent. So if they got arrested, but it was all cash payments, man.
So there's a legitimate owner who's, and they're renting legitimately.
Or you've got a lease on it or something.
Okay.
And then you re-let it to the girls. Get as many in there as you can, and then you charge them, say, a tenner a week each, or more probably. But on the rent book, it always said the proper rent. If the police raided it, they knew what was going on, but there's no paperwork to prove that these women are paying tons of money to use it.
So the markup's something like 80% or something like that?
Yeah, something stupid. They were making a lot of money out of it, but, it was a bit dodgy. You could get done for living off of moral earnings. So they usually had some front man to sort of be the landlord or whatever, but they were still doing it. I mean, all those, they're still around, all those model first floor. I'm sure they're all ex-Bernie Silver properties. Someone's running them still.
So Bernie Silver, he grew up sort of 30s and 40s. He had an apprenticeship in the, if call it in industry. He didn't go to war, did he? Didn't fight in the war.
Didn't he get booted out of the army or something for being unfit or something like that? They were all these people don't want to be in the army. All of them, yeah. All of them wanted to get out of the army. I mean, the Crays, the Richardsons, all of these people had to do national service, and they sort of refused to do it. During the war, Billy Hill, Frankie Fraser, they're all fighting age. None of them went into the army.
And so how did he get his big break? Because he was just an apprentice, wasn't he?
He got him with the Maltese, didn't he? This guy called Big Frank Mifsud, who was an ex-copper from Malta. He was over here. I mean, the Maltese were part of the British Empire, so they all had British passports and that. So the Messinas were the big pimp gang of the 30s and 40s. But by the 50s, that Duncan Webb, Billy Hill's
the journalist,
pet journalist, did an expose on the Messinas, stuck their pictures on the front page of the Sunday People, deport these men now, and they all disappeared. So I think Bernie stepped basically into their shoes.
Filled the vacuum.
Yeah. Because I think they were still running some stuff. They were living in Belgium, and they had a woman called Martha Watts who was bringing the money back and forward. They weren't Soho so much. They were Shepherd Market, Curzon Street, round there.
Okay.
But I think there was a bit of racism in there. Nobody seemed to like the Maltese. They always sort of looked down on them a bit. So Mifsud brought a bit of muscle over, and so they teamed up somehow. All of this stuff's pretty vague.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to write it down, are they?
No, exactly. So, but by the 60s, they had a thing called a syndicate going.
So this is Bernie and Frank, the top of the tree, and then a whole kind of fairly loose network, but a network of clubs and club owners and cutthroats and farms and everything. So this title of King of Soho. Do we know when that came about? Do you know when that?
Probably
And
through
is
the
it something that
papers
is it
or
something?
something.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that he himself. Everything I've heard
Nah.
about Bernie, he tried to keep it quite discreet.
Yeah, a
It
lot
was
of
just
them
about
did.
money.
He's not
You
going to
know.
walk around Soho with a crown on his head, is he? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, yeah, it's usual. That's usually newspaper chat. You know, like, oh, the king of this and vice king, yeah, vice lord.
Yeah.
They always seem to use these aristocratic terms when it comes to king of the underworld and the Viscount of Vice.
Yeah. He got together the various club owners and he got them to buy stakes in each of them. So what's that about?
Well, basically, they were all fighting. So to stop them
The strip club
fighting,
owners.
yeah. But I think this was all the little Maltese mob. So what he did, he gave everyone shares in each other's club. So say you had one club, you'd have like A and B were sort of partners in that, and then the next one, B and C, would be partners in it. So everyone had a stake in all these clubs, and if they did well, they all made money out of it, which lasted for quite a while. But you know what these people are like. Sooner or later, they're going to start fighting, and I think they did. It was things like fire bombings and stuff like that. You know, the thing is with all these operations, you can't go to the police.
No, exactly.
Do you know what I mean? So like, it's basically who's the toughest.
Well, Bernie ran the police, didn't he, basically?
Yeah, before you talk about any stuff in Soho in the 50s and 60s, the biggest gang in Soho was the police. You had to pay them to operate. Wally Virgo's the head of the Vice Squad or whatever it was called. And then his two deputies, Moody and Drury, you basically had to pay them. I think it was like 100 quid a week to operate. And if you wanted to open a sex shop or whatever, something like that, you had to take them out for lunch. Do you know what I mean? Somewhere nice usually. And they tell you what you've got to pay them. And if you don't do it, they just start raiding you all the time. You read different amounts. The only person who wrote it down was Bernie. I mean, he had that book. If you ever watch that film, The Bank Job, Jason Statham, which is based on a real robbery, and you've got David Suchet plays, I can't remember the name of the character, but he's got a book that details every payment he ever made to the police. So he wants that back, you know. And Humphreys had one as well. So he probably got that off of Bernie. And Bernie's motto was, get them while they're young. And he's like, every time I say that on tours, people think, oh, you're talking about girls. It's coppers. When they're on the beat, he's chucking them fivers and all that. And as they move up through the ranks, they're compromised and they got their hand out all the time and they're basically corrupted. I mean, doing a gangland tour in Soho, I've had quite a few coppers turn up on it, or ex-coppers. And one of them, this Scottish guy, he goes, yeah, he said, I was in the Met, I was a murder detective. He goes, but when I came down from Scotland, I was stationed in Soho. And there used to be a section house in Broadwick Street. And he said, like, everything you're saying is true, man. He said, we all knew it was going on. And they'd come round, like, the coppers sticking money in your top pocket. And if you didn't give it back, if you give it back to them, you've seen a suspect. You know, if you get in trouble in an alley and you need a bit of help and they think you're a grass, they're not coming. They were like a gang, man. And he had all them working for him and they're all paying them. I was working in a sex shop in Old Compton Street and I got raided by the police and I was all sort of thinking I'm going to get arrested and they all laughed at me. Said, no, you know what I mean? I won't tell you what they said, but, you know, you idiot. You know what I mean? Like, you said, we pay them.
You silly Billy.
Yeah, we pay them. They go, they do this all the time just to keep up appearances. And he said, like, I can tell by what they've taken away, they probably got a stag night in the station tonight. You watch the Sweeney when they're all that film when they're watching the dirty films, all sitting there. Oh, Bill, you should do that all the time. If you didn't pay them, you couldn't work in Soho.
So this paying the police system is quite regimented. It's not casual, is it? It's like it's almost like it's just a business expense. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so was this a system that Bernie inherited, or did he kind of like?
Sure, in the 20s it was going on. That Mrs. Maybrick, the 43 Club in Gerrard Street, she had a copper she was paying. So it's been going on forever, man. Apparently Mondays were payday, and they all used to meet in that, that Newburgh Street, the White Horse. Apparently that was run by an ex-copper, and that's where everyone used to bring in the envelopes on a Monday, and that's where everyone used to get paid off. So if you think about it, at one time I think there was over 200 sex shops or, porn cinemas, whatever in Soho, and they're all paying £100 a week.
It's
that's
thousands of thousands of pounds.
Yeah, and that's back then. 100 quid then was... I mean, what were people earning then? 15 quid a week, 20 quid a week?
Yeah.
So, that 200 times every week.
So when you were working there, late 70s?
Yeah.
But it's still going on, that paying off the coppers?
Yeah. Drury and Virgo and Moody all got done. They were high-ranking coppers. I mean, detective chief, superintendents up there, they're not noddy coppers. Virgo's got quashed. But the other two, I think they got like 8 years, 10 years. But I think that's the last high-profile coppers that have ever gone to prison, really. I remember that in the papers, and then me and my dad started working down here, and it was still going on. It's just a different set of coppers. A load of them resigned, ill health. They always let them disappear because, they don't want to admit there's at least 200 bent coppers in Soho. You know what I mean? That's not a good look for the police. They're never going to admit that, so they jail a few. But it's always the bad apple thing that they do. Oh, rogues.
Yeah.
Rogues.
Spoiling the barrel.
Yeah, and all that. It's all rubbish, man. I mean, they're all at it. I mean, their wages were rubbish for starters. So there's no incentive for them to be straight. I mean, you're doing stupid hours, and I'm sure all the stuff the police have got to deal with isn't exactly lovely, and you're not getting paid properly for it. So I mean, it wasn't a lot of violence here because this was where everyone made money. And the police were making money, so they don't want anything rocking the boat.
This was Bernie's philosophy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just like, keep it all quiet. And when I interviewed Oliver Carter a few weeks ago, he was saying in the early 70s, when it all started to go to pieces, when the neon signs were going up and all that sort of stuff. And actually, Bernie had kept it relatively peaceful and relatively discreet.
Yeah,
and
his shops just looked ordinary. I remember the first time we pulled up in front, I'm sure the first one we worked in, me and my dad, was one of his. I might have met him, but, like we were saying before, he's probably a nondescript guy that just came in and was quiet and left, or probably didn't bother. Because, we weren't exactly recreating ancient Rome in this basement. I mean, basically clear the basement out, paint all the walls white, screw cinema seats. All the cinemas were closing, so they were buying all the cinema seats. Put a table at the back. I mean, this is just as videos coming out as well, so they were still using Super 8 films, and they had a projector on a table at the back and these rows of seats, and that was it. So you don't really need to be there. I mean, that first sex shop, you wouldn't even know it was a sex shop, really. It was just sort of like a plain shop, and it's only when you win. And even in the interior, I mean, it wasn't like, these Ann Summers all look flashy. And
do you know much about this Tommy Smithson murder? Because it happened in the 50s, didn't it? But he didn't get convicted. He didn't come to trial until the 70s.
Yeah, so Smithson was a bit of a bully, man. I mean, he was like shaking down all the Maltese, and he was a crazy bastard, apparently. I've heard a story. Billy Hill and Jack Spott had a meet with him. They had some sort of argument, and they, that cigarette factory in Camden with the two black cats outside.
Yeah.
And they met him there, and he turned up with a gun. And they this Paddington club owner guy, Dave Barry, took the gun off him and said, look, you don't need a gun. And as soon as they got the gun off of him, Billy Hill just cut him to pieces. And he nearly died.
Is that by a scar?
Yeah, they chopped him right up. And I think this is about a year or so before he gets killed. And apparently that night, he turned up in Soho, covered in bandages, bleeding everywhere with a shotgun, looking for Billy Hill. Do you know what I mean? That's how nutty he was. So I think there was another Maltese club owner, George, is it Karuna?
Karuna, yeah.
Yeah, is that how you pronounce it? Karuna.
Like
and Smithson had a girlfriend who was a brass, and she got nicked or something, and he was going round trying to get money for her bail or something out of all these Maltese club owners, and I think he told him to do one.
Doing a whip round.
Yeah. This used to happen a lot, and I'm not sure, but whatever it was, they wanted to get rid of him, and they paid that Philip Law and that Spampinato, is it Spampinato, the other bloke? Something
like that, yeah.
So they went down and it basically shot him in Carlton Vale. And then the girl that Smithson was with, this was all in the papers, it was a massive big thing, and she testified that it was self-defence, like that Smithson pulled a gun on the Law and it was his gun or something, and he got it off of him and killed him, like blah, blah, blah. So they went to court, and the Spampinato geezer got acquitted, but a Law got convicted for murder, and he got reprieved like 48 hours before he was due to be hung, and he did something like 11 years. And when he came out of prison, I mean, this is like Mifsud and Silver paid him to kill Smithson. So he went to get his money after he come out of prison, and they chucked sixpence on the floor and said, look, there's your money. And what could he do? And then he ended up going to New York. And then when they were nicking Bernie, they resurrect this, you paid for this guy to be murdered. And they went and found a Law in New York, and they found Spantanato. Apparently he was touting outside a wine bar in Malta at the time. So he's got no money and a law. I don't know what he was doing. But they brought him back to London and said, like, we'll testify.
Against Bernie?
Yeah, and Mifsud. And then all of a sudden, Spampinato disappeared, and back in Malta, he's got a villa by the beach and a big flash car and all that. And they let a law go back to New York. And, he said, well, why do you let him go? He said, he promised he was going to come back again. But then all of a sudden, back in New York, he's got like 60 grand. So they paid him off in the end. So they got their money in the end, but they had to wait for it. But he still got done for it, Bernie. I mean, he got done for conspiracy to murder or something like that. But then he appealed and it got quashed, so...
They put the hit out on Scarface.
Yeah, Smithson, yeah.
Just because he was just going around.
Yeah, he was just
disrupting
annoying.
their business.
Yeah, he was annoying, I think.
Right.
And he was just a nutter.
So Bernie was basically the head of this syndicate, and he's the only one who wasn't Maltese. How did that come about? Do you know? Was he just
I don't know, man. I don't think there was that much ethnic stuff going on. I think it was just all sort of, again, the Maltese stuck together, I think mainly because the British crooks, like I said, were a bit sort of racist towards them.
Yeah.
So they sort of stuck together. And probably Jews got a bit of it as well, man. It wouldn't surprise me. I'm sure back in those days, they got a lot of shit off people, do you know what I mean, for being Jewish. So, yeah, maybe it was the outcasts getting together. It's possible.
So Bernie's at his peak in the late 60s.
Yeah.
How does his downfall come about? Because it seems to be businesses thriving.
As usual, it's the papers. Vice girls at the King of Soho's court, and they do these exposés. And there was a lot of, I think, that Insight team, in the Sunday Times, they sort of unveiled these dodgy coppers, a firm within a firm, they all call themselves. But it was probably because he got in the papers.
In the early 70s, there was a big takedown of corruption, wasn't there? So presumably he gets dragged down with all that.
I think it's part of the Humphreys thing as well. I mean, they got this new commissioner, that Robert Mark, remember he used to do the tyre adverts.
I am convinced.
Yeah. A significant improvement to public safety or something like that. Yeah, that's when he packed in the police. Yeah, he come along and he was from outside London somewhere because they didn't trust any of the coppers from London. I mean, I think he brought a load of people in from Suffolk or someone, and everyone was calling them the Swede. Do you know what I mean? But the London coppers, they were all bent. And then he gets done, him and Mifsud got done, not the murder, the other one that you sent me the clips on.
Immoral earnings.
Yeah, so they've done them for that, big fines and stuff like that. But I think they resurrected that. Maybe one of them two, Lords, Spampinato, one of them got in touch with him and said, oh, yeah, heard you want to nick Bernie, I can tell you something. All of this stuff's a bit sketchy. No one's done this stuff, 100%. But yeah, it's usually newspaper things. And once it's in the paper, the police have to be seen to be doing their job. Do you know what I mean? And I think this is about the same time, so 75, 76, they're getting done. And this is the same time that Drury, Virgo, and that Moody are getting done as well. So it's probably fallout from that. And the Jimmy Humphreys was tied in with Silver as well. So, all of this, I suppose someone on the Sunday Times would call it a perfect porn storm. So all this happens around the same time, and it's all the usual, we're going to have a big clean-up and da-da-da-da-da. Do you think one sex shop shut because of this? One brothel shut down? It's just, they've got mates on the outside.
Shut down temporarily, don't they?
Yeah. They used to do little raids and they'd shut them down for the day. Apparently when he came out of prison, he kept a really low profile. Maybe that's why I never saw him. Do you know what I mean? When I was working down there. Or if I did, I didn't know.
He did have an office.
Apparently that knocking shop next to the Coach and Horses was his office.
Yeah, it's like a barber's now, isn't it?
Yeah, and he had a place in Greek Street. The guy out of Bar Italia told me he used to have a place in Greek Street. During the 90s, he used to sit outside there, Greek Street up towards Soho Square. And he said he used to sit outside there and drink coffee and smoke cigarettes all day and just watch the world go by. But he still had a lot of property here, so he's just collecting the rents off of that and living off of that, I suppose.
He owned a place in Knightsbridge.
Yeah, no, he made some serious money. Those sex shops were, they're not there for a laugh. If you can afford to pay the police £100 a week, they were making a lot of money. And they were busy, these gaffs. I suppose all these perverts are all online now, man, instead of making a beeline to Soho.
As Aidan mentioned there, a character based on Bernie Silver was portrayed by David Suchet in the 2008 film The Bank Job, which is well worth a watch. Thank you to Aidan McManus for making his 4th visit to Soho Bites. You can hear more of Aidan on his regular show on Portobello Radio, and if you'd like to go on one of his walking tours of Soho and other parts of London, you can find all the details at flipsidelondontours.com. Don't worry about dashing off for a pen to write that down though, because all of those details can be found on the show notes for this episode 51, at sohobitespodcast.com. Hello, this is what's known as a mid-roll ad. It's one of those annoying interruptions that's inserted retrospectively at just the wrong point. And the reason for it is that Soho Bites takes up hours of time every month, and I'm hoping you might be able to support the show. There are 2 ways you can do this. One is for free, and it's to leave the show a star rating or kind review. You can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/review. Or if you'd like to assist financially to help cover our costs, you can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Thank you very much. Apologies for the interruption, and back to the episode. The first thing I need to point out about our chosen film for this episode, King of the Underworld from 1952, is that it should not be confused with another film, I would say a better one, with the same title from 1939. The 1939 film stars a young Humphry Bogart and is about a doctor who gets entangled in the world of gang crime. The 1952 film is British and stars a not young Todd Slaughter as Terence Riley, who, we are told, is a master villain. He runs his empire from an office in Hatton Garden, where he passes himself off as a legitimate diamond dealer, but is actually a blackmailer who occasionally dabbles in murder. A constant thorn in Riley's side is Inspector Morley, played by Patrick Barr. He's a former Scotland Yard detective turned private investigator who's been wanting to bring Riley down for many years.
I've been hunting Riley from the day he shot and killed my best friend when we were constables on the same beat. Through a legal trick, he managed to escape justice, and for 20 years he matched his cunning brain against every device I used in my attempts to trap him.
As you can hear, the sound in this film is not of the greatest quality. The film is a confusing mashup of 3 different and mostly unrelated stories. The first story concerns Riley's attempts to extort huge wadges of cash from a posh lady. He's in possession of some letters relating to an unnamed indiscretion on her part some time ago.
All I want is the return of those letters.
Aren't you even prepared to make a charge?
No, I can't. You see, my husband has been listed in the birthday honours. A scandal like this would ruin him.
Supposing I tell you that Riley is someone I've been trying to convict for a number of years. For various reasons, I haven't been able to do so. One of those reasons is because people like you persistently refuse to give evidence against it.
But how can I? If I give evidence, my husband will find out about the letters. The whole thing will be made public.
This story ends abruptly after 25 minutes or so, with Riley down but not out. We then move on to another story. This time, Riley has kidnapped a different posh lady and is demanding a ransom from her posh uncle.
Do not show this to the police, or your niece is liable to die quite suddenly. We are offering her safe return in exchange for the green eye emerald which your brother stole from Ling Fu in China 20 years ago. A man in a raincoat and cap will be at the corner of Macclesfield Street and Shaftesbury Avenue. You are to give him the emerald, and Susan will be released.
What do you advise me to do, Mr. Morley?
Nothing.
And this story also ends suddenly, with Morley having foiled the plot but leaving Riley at large. The final third of the film is a different story again. This time, Inspector Morley finds himself in the world of espionage after a dangerous scientific formula has been stolen, seemingly by a mysterious foreign power, but the culprit turns out to be none other than, guess who, Terence Riley. After this story also comes to a sudden end, with Riley on the run from the law, the whole thing is rounded off by Morley doing a piece directly to camera in which he explains Riley's fate. It's all a bit of a hodgepodge, but why? Why not just have one plot for the whole film, or maybe have all 3 stories but weave them in and out of each other? The explanation for that is simple. It wasn't originally intended to be a film at all, and is actually 3 episodes of a low-budget TV series unartfully strung together. That show, which had the snappy title Inspector Morley, late of Scotland Yard Investigates, was written by John Gilling, who went on to much greater things. It was directed by Victor Gover and was produced by Gilbert Church, who'd made the series on a wing and a prayer because he didn't actually have a TV channel on which to broadcast it. Ultimately, he did manage to sell the series to a station in Chicago, but the very small British TV market in 1952 consisted of the BBC, and they didn't want it. To salvage something from it, the 13-part series was bodged into 3 B features: King of the Underworld, Murder at Scotland Yard, and Murder at the Grange, all of which feature the ongoing battles between Morley and Riley. All of that having been said, and I feel like I might have given the impression that it's a rubbish film, King of the Underworld is not completely terrible. It certainly doesn't rate as the worst film we've ever talked about on Soho Bites. That title is still held by Soho Conspiracy, which we talked about way back in episode 16, and I can't see any film ever being worse than that. King of the Underworld has an advantage. It stars Todd Slaughter, who's always very entertaining and is completely incongruous as he's basically a Victorian melodrama villain dropped into the blitz-ravaged streets of 1950s London. Slaughter was approaching the end of his career by 1952, but had previously been massively successful as an actor and theatre manager. For years, he toured the country with his barnstorming productions, most famously Sweeney Todd and a show called Maria Martin or The Murder in the Red Barn. That's all one title. Both of these were made into films produced by George King. Todd Slaughter's high camp, palm-rubbing, moustache-twiddling, eye-rolling performances were already a throwback to an earlier era when he was at his peak in the 1930s, so by the 1950s it really is strange, and I can't help feeling he looks past his best, but there are still moments when the old Todd shines through.
Mr. Mullins, I have in my possession 68 letters, none of which has begun to outlive its usefulness. I'm quite prepared to admit that blackmail is risky, but then murder has its disadvantages too. That is why I gave up murder. The point is that crime is not what it used to be, Mr. Mullins. At the moment it's going through a phase of depression. Now would you like to run away? I'm particularly anxious to fumigate the air, and I see no point in doing that if you are still here.
Patrick Barr as Inspector Morley presents as a fairly standard, tweed-wearing, pipe-smoking detective of the day, with a little twist though, because it turns out that he's actually quite good at disguises. But a standout character is his assistant, Eileen Trotter, played by Tucker Maguire. Originally from the US, Tucker Maguire was based in London for most of her life and is best known for playing the unsinkable Molly Brown in the 1958 Titanic film A Night to Remember.
Can't just sit here and do nothing. Come on, girls, roll!
Eileen has a surprising amount of agency for a female character of that period and often puts herself in danger. She independently follows up hunches in a Lois Lane type way and enters the Lion's Den, i.e. Riley's office, in disguise on a couple of occasions.
And so you say Mullins couldn't come. Then I suppose Mr. Trent sent you.
Mr. Trent?
Mm-hmm.
Don't make me laugh. I am Mr. Trent.
You? Mister?
Yeah, I use Mr. so to fool the cops. Ain't it a honey?
It is indeed. But what a brilliant idea.
I'm full of them, Bud. I'm just full of them. You know what? You and me ought to team up. With your good looks and my brains, there'd be no holding us. No holding us.
The other star of the film is London itself. Although much of the film is shot in very basic 3-wall sets, the street scenes look like they're filmed on the fly, perhaps from the back of a truck. And we see the streets of war-torn London as they actually were, with the occasional quizzical passerby glancing at the camera. Morley tails a crook through the streets of Soho at one point, and in another scene a chase takes place through a bomb site near King's Cross. This, combined with expository voiceovers from Inspector Morley, sometimes gives it the feel of a true crime documentary. Vic Pratt is an author and film historian and works at the BFI, that's the British Film Institute, as a video producer. He's a confirmed fan of Todd Slaughter and even has a tenuous family connection to the great man. After my whole family were laid low by a horrible lurgy last week, I was forced to cancel our planned in-person meeting in Soho, so we met instead online, where Vic and I discussed Todd Slaughter and his 1952 seldom-seen film, King of the Underworld. Vic, welcome to Soho Bites. It's great to have you on. I've had my eye on you for a while, actually, so it's good to get you on.
Thanks,
as it were.
Thanks, Dom.
Madam.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
So I think we're agreed. I think that King of the Underworld isn't the best film ever, but it is quite interesting for many reasons. I mean, I wouldn't do a film of Soho Bites if I didn't have some reason to do it. The main reason it's of interest to people is because it's Todd Slaughter's last film, or it's one of his last couple of films.
Yeah, right at the end. Not his actual last, but one of the last few. And I mean, in itself, it's kind of peculiar in that it wasn't intended originally to be a film. So it's a sort of combination of various things that were once intended to be a television show.
And that really shows, doesn't it, that fact that it's just 3 episodes, that the only thread running through them are the characters. The stories don't link up at all.
Well, it's an interesting thing because the whole trap that this program fell into was that it was a crime show with recurring characters, but it wasn't a serial, as you say, but they sort of attempted to wrap up the story every episode, when probably it would have been better to have what they call nowadays an arc, where you could sort of follow the sort of trajectory of the story across the 12 episodes, which I think it was supposed to be. And that would have made more sense rather than trying to sort of have a little mini drama in each one with all the same people, because you have Todd Slaughter as this sort of master criminal. Terence Riley, not a great name, is it? I mean, I was thinking that, you're going through these sort of great names. I mean, if you look at your old Republic serials or something, which this kind of reminded me of a bit because it has all these people in peril and getting rescued. You'd have like the Scorpion or the Spider, you'd have all these sort of incredible villains. But in this, Terence Riley, it's sort of like, he sounds like sort of, insurance salesman or something. It's not really.
Todd Slaughter's a better name than Terence Riley.
Yeah, totally. It's really peculiar. So they tried to have him in it as this sort of supervillain character, but that becomes a bit weird when you think if you're going to split it over 12 episodes, it's going to be pretty hard for him to hide the fact that he's a supervillain. If we think back to last week and he was already foiled, it's like Inspector Morley surely already knows what's going to happen next week. It's going to be the same old bloke having another sort of evil scheme, Todd Slaughter again. So it's a bit of a peculiar sort of paradox, I suppose, the whole concept.
He only has the one nemesis, doesn't he? Because there's 2 or 3 films made from this series, and it's all Terence Riley.
A couple of films were made out of bits of these episodes. I had a look online, and you can find some of the original episodes. There's about 6 or 8 of them online, and so there are some of the ones that we see in these 2 compilation films, and also some other bits as well. But it's a bit strange when you consider that I've never seen a sort of mysterious master villain before who has his name on an office door, and you can just go and sort of knock on his door and say, "Hello, is Mr. Riley there? I'd like some villainy, please." So it's a bit strange, and you're sort of wondering why the inspector just doesn't go around there and arrest him at the start of the episode.
There's one episode where Terence Riley just turns up in Molly's office and says, "You've got my ring." Surely he can arrest him. Well, he can't arrest him because he's no longer a police officer. He's now a private investigator.
It's quite a sort of tiny box of incoherent narrative strands. This whole film is sort of like, you ever hear of that film where you can play the reels in any order? This is a kind of a bit like that, because none of it really ties up.
That's true.
It's sort of, as I was watching these, and I was enjoying, let's not say this is a film that doesn't have things to enjoy about it. Of course it does. You've got the great Todd Slaughter in it, of course. But it's the kind of film where you feel like you could start at any point and just watch it. There's 3 little storyettes in this one feature, but you could start anywhere, really. It doesn't really matter, because none of it makes any sense. There's no sort of rationality. It's like sort of supremely illogical throughout. So you might as well just enjoy it, right? Get in there. And that's Todd Slaughter. That's what Todd Slaughter's about.
Yeah, there's only one moment where there is an indication of it being something that's a bit linear when he says, so Morley says to his secretary, oh, he'd recognise you, wouldn't he? Because she's been round in disguise and swindled him out of some letters in the first
Well, that's
story.
one of the rare occasions where they actually sort of think about is this plausible? Because it's sort of mostly back of a fag packet stuff. And I mean, it's all written by John Gilling, who went on to do much more sort of well-loved and appreciated quality stuff, doing stuff for Hammer and, lots of films of his own that he directed too. One of the things about John Gilling is that he couldn't have thought much of these scripts because one of his maxims was if he ever wrote a script that he really liked, he would make sure to direct it himself. That was how it worked. So he would always force the company's hand, so he would have to direct the ones he really liked. So you can see this is a bit of a sort of hack work for hire. I mean, also I noticed Don Chaffee is also in the credits for this, who would also go on to do better work for Hammer. This is a kind of example of the proliferation of small British film companies that popped up after the war. And in those early years of the 1950s, Ambassador Productions, very tiny little independent outfit. But there were many, many of them in those post-war years, of which Hammer would be relaunched as one of those in that time. But it's much smaller than Hammer. You had all these little concerns that would do one or two films, companies like Van Dyke, Adelphi, all these little companies who would just make one or two films sometimes and then disappear, or they'd be swallowed up by bigger concerns. Ambassador, they wanted this to be a TV show, but Ambassador were dumb enough to shoot the whole series without sort of making sure someone was going to screen it.
So that wasn't normal, was it? It wasn't normal to kind of make something without getting commissioned first by the BBC.
No,
I mean, were there independent production companies like there is now?
Well, it's a peculiar thing. I don't really think the BBC were in the habit of sort of hiring sort of independent companies to do their stuff. I mean, it would be done under the auspices of the BBC. They had various crime shows of their own. So this idea that they were just going to get some random Tuppenny Halfpenny outfit to do it with like shooting on a shoestring is pretty bonkers. All these companies who were doing this stuff, they thought they would sell it somehow, and they generally did in the States, because I mean, US had much more of a tradition of independent companies working in early TV. That would often happen, and there was also much more of a market for sort of British B pictures around this time. So these episodes could be rolled into something that would be at the bottom end of a double bill, which is what happened with this one, King of the Underworld. I believe that these episodes did get shown in America
as TV, as TV series, not as a film. Yeah,
this did happen. I mean, I'm sort of thinking about one that I released in one of the BFI's Short Sharp Shocks Blu-ray sets, which are great compilations of old sort of short films. There's one called Strange Stories, which was directed by Don Chaffee, who worked on this actually. Which was a portmanteau with Valentine Dial and John Laurie, and that one again, they rolled it into a sort of feature for the UK market and then sold the little bits to American TV. So it's not uncommon for that to happen, but the idea that the BBC would take it is bonkers. I mean, they would have been better a few years later when ITV was first starting up around 55. They would have had more of a chance, perhaps.
I wonder if in the TV version they rounded them off a bit more satisfactorily, because there's a clear marker in each of these three stories where it goes, you've been foiled, and then it just cuts to like 2 weeks later. I'm walking past St. Paul's Cathedral. Oh, so that's that one done now.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't make any much more sense watching the episodes, but it does get more bonkers, because the first problem you have watching the individual episodes online is trying to figure out which one comes before the others, because it's a bit of a jumble. But there's this mad stuff in it where Todd Slaughter's in prison, and then he's got this brother who looks exactly like him, who's sort of so there's this weird sort of double identity stuff going on.
Is he played by Todd Slaughter as well?
Yeah, it's bonkers, and there's
he plays
like
the two
good
roles.
brother and a bad brother, and it's crackers.
Excellent.
But it's all grist to the mill, someone like Slaughter, because, I mean, the amazing barnstorming ham of Slaughter is what I've always found really fascinating about him and what I love about him. I mean, you go back to his earlier works that he was making for in the 1930s quota films, the sort of George King films, and he would eat up the scenery. He would like wipe the floor with the supporting cast. He's like the ultimate in the sort of old style melodramatic barnstorming villain. It doesn't matter how crap the sets are, it doesn't matter how cheap the settings are, it doesn't matter how rotten and wooden all the cast that around him are. It doesn't matter how lame the script is. Todd Slaughter sort of erupts out of this like the sort of the demon in a pantomime and really sort of grabs you. And there's always something really fascinating about Todd Slaughter, and he embodied that old sort of playing big to the very far back of the gallery in the theatre. And I love if you see some of his greatest roles, like if you see him in Sweeney Todd, or my favourite, which is Maria Martin or The Murder in the Red Barn, where he's always he makes a thing of being these sort of evil, squirey type characters who are tormenting young ladies, sort of hugely duplicitous kind of squire figures. In Maria Martin, he has these long sort of kinky boots over his knees. He's sort of wearing these sort of long frock coats. Don't forget, all of this stuff was out of date even when these were coming out. It wasn't like, oh, ho, ho, those people in those days thought this was the latest thing. They didn't. This was like a revival of the old traditions that they were giving you again as Slaughter was sort of shifting towards the later stage of his career. But there's something about how he rolls his eyes and how he delights in evil and malevolence. But at the same time, you get these touches of him knowing it's evil, and that there's a kind of coyness. Oh my God, I'm doing something so evil, but he delights in it at the same time. And that, for me, is the essence of what makes him so wonderful to watch still. And it doesn't matter about the rest of the film. And as we've said, Dom, this film isn't the greatest film in the world, but anything with Todd Slaughter chewing up the scenery is always worth watching.
As you said, this film, King of the Underworld, was made on a shoestring. Would it have been a coup to get Todd Slaughter?
He was, in his latter days, he was in terrible financial trouble. He was in trouble with the taxman for years and years and years. And I think around this time, actually, he'd been made bankrupt, and he was struggling to make ends meet. I mean, these later years, when most people would have been retired, he was still touring up and down the country, doing stuff like Maria Martin, doing Sweeney Todd, playing everywhere, any old show, because he knew all the parts in all the shows. And if you look back in his filmography and what he did on stage, in the early days, he would play the young roles, he'd play the leads, he would play the mysterious gypsies, he would do this. But then later on, he would play the villainous squires, he would play the older characters as well, because as he had been in this rep forever, he knew all the parts in all the plays. And so he could just step in and do any old part and do it. And so this is what he was doing right into the 50s, right up to his death. He pretty much died after coming on stage. He was sort of collapse and just die. he was quite an incredible old stager, and he couldn't stop. He could never retire. He could never stop and just take it easy.
He was an actor manager, wasn't he, in the old style? So he would like run the theatre and be the lead and everything, and he ran the theatre at Elephant and Castle.
That's right. Yeah.
Which became the Coronet Cinema. In this film, you only really, I think, see glimpses of the 1930s. Because I know Todd Slaughter from the 30s films, and then I don't know what he did after that, and then suddenly I see him in this. And he gets given moments when he really shines. There's a fantastic line where he says, "I wish to fumigate the room, and I see little point in doing that while you're still here."
He has to make the most of it, because it ain't the greatest dialogue he's given you, is it? But he makes it hammy. He makes it come to life, with the roll of his eyes. I love that even though we're in post-war London and everyone's in their sort of early 50s outfits, he's still wearing like this frock coat, that looks like
the Edwardian outfit.
He's so out of time in this. He's sort of like so peculiarly anachronistic within all of this, even more so than he would have been in the 30s. I think that's quite striking. There's a lot in this because it's sort of cheapo. There's lots of shots without much sound on them of him just walking around in London down streets, and they're really fascinating because obviously they haven't got a sound unit to record because that would be too expensive, and so you just see them. And there's even bits of sort of rubble left over from the Blitz, and then you've got this guy in his frock coat, like it's sort of, he's even got a monocle. I mean, men with monocles, they're one of my fascinations. And I love that he still has a monocle this late on into the 20th century. The monocle was out of date by the Aldwych farces of the early 30s. It was already a symbol of the silly ass, sort of, play the game, you cads. It was all that sort of thing. That's what it had become. But he's still got one. He's also got a snuff box. And I love that there's a bit where he's trying to open his snuff box and he can't.
He's struggling
to open his snuff box. And you're like, okay, you can't afford a second take on this. So they just wait until he gets it. It makes you think of probably him out on stage at night and the props just not working, but he just has to carry on. And he does. He's the old trooper, isn't he? The ultimate old trooper. Todd Slaughter was not being choosy about the jobs he was getting at this time. Basically, he had to take whatever work he could get. This was an attempt to relaunch him. So if you look at the director of this, Victor Gover, he shot a few things around that time at Bushy Studios using some of these cast and crew. The Curse of the Raidens, also featuring Todd Slaughter, which is another very hammy, cheap but very hammy and well worth a watch because of Slaughter's sort of old style melodrama that came a few years before this one. That's another one worth a look, certainly. The greatest works of Todd Slaughter are those early ones of the 30s and into the 40s. And as you said, Dom, there's a sort of gap in the middle there where I think, he was considered kind of old hat when he first began, but he was just, there was a bit of a void in the late 30s, early 40s because the more respectable, larger studios were kind of reluctant to do stuff that was seen as sort of seedy or sort of salacious or horrific. Although you had the H for Horror certificate by that time, there was certainly a swing away from horror stuff in the late 30s because you'll recall that in the States there was a bit of a flap about sort of horror films like The Black Cat and, sort of in the mid to late 30s, and so there was a bit of a turn away from it. And so that's when you got sort of entrepreneurs like George King who would step in and say, okay, if the other studios, the big studios, won't make horror or won't make this kind of melodrama, I can do it. They seized that opportunity and got in there. But it was already considered to have passed its peak in terms of the Todd Slaughter phenomenon by the mid 40s.
I've read that it was generally, the critics were a bit sniffy about his work in the 30s, but there were a few kind of standouts, and one of them was Graham Greene, who actually was quite a fan of Todd Slaughter. Yeah. And I think it was to do with the fact that when he did theatre, which he's never stopped doing, it was theatre for working people, for normal people. It was affordable. You could go and see it. You didn't have to take out a mortgage or save up to go. And it was barnstorming and all that kind of stuff. And he's entertaining. And he brought that to film. And I think Graham Greene seemed to approve of that.
Yeah, I mean, Graham Greene, I guess he was somewhat unusual in being a sort of an intellectual. He would be seen as a sort of a very erudite academic fellow, but he did very much enjoy those sort of what would be seen as provincial or working class entertainments. He had a lot of respect for those. The Journal of the BFI in those days, the monthly film bulletin, would have just panned all these films and sort of a load of rubbish for the sort of the uneducated people who don't live in the city centres. Same as with the quota quickies, but a more modern view now would sort of accept that, wow, this stuff is a great untapped source not only of entertainment but incredible social history value as well. It's an amazing resource. Thank heavens these films are still around, and they didn't just all get lost.
Yeah. One of the things I quite liked about the film was the fact that the streets scenes are almost like gonzo filming. It looks like it's been shot from a car. They're not paid extras, those people in the background. No. And it is the sort of rubble strewn. There's a chase scene across, I think it's kind of Gray's Inn Road kind of area. just bomb sites, just
Is it
rubble.
Grazing Road? I was
And
wondering where it was. It looked like...
Yeah, according to Real Streets, which is my go-to website.
Well, that's one of the great things about low budget filmmaking around that time. I mean, I just recently been working on a Children's Film Foundation set, which had stuff in a film all shot around Bermondsey, exactly the same year as this film came out, and you can see all the wreckage of the docks and the sort of the half demolished docks where bombs have dropped and all the cobbled streets leading into them, and you're thinking, gosh, the fact that they had no money means that we've got this brilliant bit of footage of actual stuff going on there. And as you say, Dom, in this one, the people are sort of looking around, saying, "Where's that camera come from? What are they filming?" And then there's Todd Slaughter in his frock coat, sort of marching about like he's sort of come out of the last century. It's incredible.
The only person I found interesting, apart from Todd Slaughter, is Tucker Maguire, who plays Eileen Trotter, his Morley's secretary. I thought, oh, Tucker, that's an unusual name. Obviously, he turned out to be American because only Americans are called Tucker. I realised I had seen her in at least one thing, which is A Night to Remember. And she's in the boat when the Titanic's sinking, and she starts, "We've got to row back, we've got to save all those people who are drowning." Oh my God, I remember that moment from Saturday matinees on BBC Two when I was a kid. But she's quite an interesting character. She lived in London pretty much her whole life. Did you read that? I sent you that anecdote.
Yeah, that was
somebody wrote about the.
Yeah.
So just to explain, in the early 80s, she started going to creative writing classes. I think it's on City Lit in Covent Garden. Didn't tell anybody in the class. She was double the age of anybody else in the class, and then it kind of came out. I think somebody kind of twigged that she was the woman from the Titanic film. And then she sort of regaled everybody these anecdotes about old film, which I thought she was quite good. I enjoyed her performance. There's a line when she says, "I'll do this thing for you, Inspector Morley." So that's very noble of you, Eileen. Says, "Well, I'm a very noble woman." Both her and Patrick Barr, Inspector Morley, have disguise moments. So they're kind of going, "Oh, look, we can whack a bit of facial hair on these people. That only cost like a farthing from the or it's free from the prop store."
I mean, yeah, this sort of,
and we can get them to do another character.
This reminds
almost.
you that they didn't have any money to get anyone else in, so they basically had to just try and make them into different characters to get some sort of variety across the episodes, right? Also, similarly quickly cobbled is that weird ending on this film where you see the inspector, and 2 weeks later he was hung, or whatever it is. It's something like, it's just a real sort of anti-climax after we've just seen Todd trying to chuck a bath full of acid all over them. But it's just so cheap, and it's so obviously just a bath with about 2 inches of tepid water in it.
Yeah, he says 8 gallons of the finest acid. That's never 8 gallons.
No.
For a start.
No, it's more like, when the royal family in the wartime are supposed to bathe in 2 inches of water. It's a bit like that, isn't it? Yeah.
That final tacked on ending, it looks like it's shot on different film stock.
That's the
a few weeks later.
The whole thing is sort of, you're already sort of mentally confounded by the fact that it's stories within stories within stories. It's all sort of like a flashback within a flashback within a flashback, isn't it? And it adds that slightly hallucinogenic quality of it. So I would say it's well worth a watch, actually. I mean, it's it sort of slips into a kind of unintentional surrealism, which kind of almost reminds me of stuff like latter day Bela Lugosi stuff that he was doing over at Monogram in the 1940s, where you're almost not in a world where anything normal or rational happens anymore. It's like reality is totally turned on its head in this bizarre cinematic universe, and like Lugosi, who is a sort of a point of reference for that kind of bizarre semi-surrealist but not intentionally stuff, so Todd Slaughter can be a focus of this kind of he just erupts like this mythological figure out of the middle of this balminess. It's quite incredible.
There's a slightly weird plot point, which is Inspector Morley has managed to ambush Riley, tied him up at this house in Clapham, in a basement in Clapham, but he escapes helped by these kids. Yeah, there's a man all tied up down here. So Morley is going to Riley's office to get the blackmail letters, but he's late because he gets a puncture and takes Riley's car to the garage to get the puncture fixed. What? Just abandon it. Just leave the doors wide open and just run to the office. What are you doing? And that means then it gets waylaid by Riley. It doesn't make sense.
Nothing
It's
makes
bizarre.
sense though. Just the whole fact where he sort of catches him in the basement and ties him up. It's like he's waiting there to be tied up. There's no sort of sense of a struggle or anything. It's like, the function of this narrative, the point we're at in this narrative means I have to tie you up. But we all know I'm not really tying you up. It's just the pretense of tying you up because it's all part of that theatrical tradition, which is, and then just tying him up is just what you do at this point in the narrative. And similarly, whenever Todd Slaughter attacks someone, he sort of walks really slow, and you think probably you'd have to just lunge at him, but he's actually walking really slow across the room before he sort of grabs him. It's almost like it's sort of slowed down, because everything is big, everything is large with Todd Slaughter, and it takes some time. His acting is very mannered, again in that Bela Lugosi sort of way, which adapts a very old action tradition.
And you saw Plan 9 from Outer Space
Sure
last
did.
night, didn't you?
That's a similar work of kind of peculiar ineptitude and genius at the same time.
So when we bumped into each other a few weeks ago at the British Film Institute, you mentioned that your granddad had seen Todd Slaughter performing at some point. Could you tell me about that?
As we mentioned earlier, Todd Slaughter was sort of on an endless tour. He's kind of a bit like the Bob Dylan of the melodramas. He never ended his tour, and so he was just endlessly, to appease the tax man, he and his wife would just sort of tour the country doing endless revivals of mostly, it would seem, Sweeney Todd and Maria Martin. And I'm not entirely sure which one it was that my granddad saw. I can see that from data I've found online, they were doing Sweeney Todd in the Hackney Empire in 1954. And then he was playing Maria Martin at least into 1955 and 1956. So it was one of these shows. And my granddad would have seen this at an East End theatre. So that would have been where it was in the sort of early to mid 50s, in those last years. And he was very proud of the fact that he'd seen Todd Slaughter because he was a massive, massive cinema fan. He was very proud of the fact that he'd seen Todd Slaughter, and he said that in the middle of the play, when the sort of curtain fell on the first half of the show, it wasn't like a normal thing where you just sort of sit and have your gin and tonic and then go back in to see the second half. Apparently, Todd Slaughter would sort of erupt from behind the curtains and sort of come down and sort of mingle with the general hoi polloi, and he would sort of walk around in the audience, and he would be in full costume still, and would remain in character throughout the interval. And so he might say hello to a couple of the chaps, but mostly he was only interested in talking to the ladies in the audience. And, he'd sort of prowl around the audience saying, my proud beauty, and, what a lovely neck you have, my dear, this sort of stuff. And he would go around regaling all the ladies with his kind of slightly dangerous charms, shall we say. He would sort of go around sort of chatting to all the ladies before, sort of when the 5-minute bell would go, he sort of whip back behind the curtains to get ready again. So this is what he did. He really believed in sort of interacting with his audience. And my granddad was really pleased that this had happened and that he'd seen it. And I think he was surprised that I was interested. But yeah, it was a great story. And I was so pleased that I got to hear that story. So I couldn't meet Todd Slaughter, but at least secondhand, I can vicariously imagine that I did.
The fact that he didn't take advantage of having a 15-minute break to go to a cup of tea is amazing.
I think a part of that was he almost lived these roles. I think he was the embodiment of those kind of, I don't know, you get these kind of actors like sort of Robert Newton, who thought he was Long John Silver. You've got people who sort of, I think he submerged himself so deeply in the role. Perhaps he stayed in that role through the whole performance. It's interesting to speculate, isn't it?
Thank you very much to Vic Pratt from the BFI for coming on the show to discuss King of the Underworld. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. Vic is currently writing a book, but I can't remember if it's supposed to be a secret or not. I'm not taking any chances, so we'll say nothing more for now. But when publication is imminent, I will certainly shout about it. If you'd like to watch King of the Underworld, by the way, it's available to watch right now for free on Talking Pictures TV's streaming platform, TPTV Encore. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And this is not the first time I've made a podcast episode featuring Todd Slaughter. We covered Sweeney Todd, another of his films, in our series Kino Quickies a few years ago, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that too, along with information about Aidan's walking tours and other bits and bobs about him and Vic. Where'd you go to find all of that, you're asking? Why? To SohoBitesPodcast.com, of course. If you've enjoyed listening to Soho Bites at any point in your life, I'd be really grateful if you could leave a star rating or review, which for algorithmic reasons would help other people to find the show, apparently. So you can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/review. And if you would like me to return those compromising letters to you, I'm afraid it will cost. Please go to sohobitespodcast.com/donate to pay the ransom, and by very good fortune, you'd also be helping to support the show. We are grateful for the continued support of the Museum of Soho, who allow me sometimes to do my recordings for the show in their gallery in the Orley's Joy building at 75 Dean Street. Check them out at mosoho.org.uk. Soho Bites is produced by me, Dom DeLargy, and is based on an original idea by Dr. Jing and Young. That's it for this month. Next month's film is a bit more recent and is pretty much guaranteed to be NSFW. See you then, and bye for now.